Peter, let me just go through a couple of things here just so we can understand where you're coming from. Could you first tell us a little bit about yourself and your expertise and how you came to be interested in real estate and in housing policy in general?
Okay, I'm a local boy, born Hilo, raised on Oahu, St. Louis High School, University of Hawaii, majored in real estate. Bought my first property when I was 15 years old.
Wow.
By 20, I own an interest in, I think, 3 or 4 units. All my brothers and sisters bought real estate. There's 5 of us when we were teenagers, all with money we saved. We were fortunate in that our mother was in real estate, Peter Savio, very prominent realtor back in the late 50s, early 60s. First woman to be president of the Board of Realtors for the county. First woman president for the Board of Realtors was Allman before her, Allman after her. Back in the late 50s, early 60s, because I was so interested in real estate, she used to take me to a lot of the meetings. So I had the chance to meet a lot of people. So I guess I've always been in real estate. My passion has always been affordable housing. I'm an affordable housing developer. And I've developed, about 6,000, 7,000 affordable units. I do not use government funds. I do it privately. I've given away about $400 million in profit to my buyers in the form of price reductions. On my present ag condos that I'm doing, I'm probably going to give away another $200 million in profits to my buyers in the form of price reductions. I mean, I'm committed to affordable housing. And I've been in real estate since I was probably about 11 years old. I used to do all of my mom's paperwork in terms of, in the old days, you got little cards that showed you the price of a house that was for sale with a picture and all the factual information. I used to file that for her. And of course, when I filed them, I read it. So I was a walking encyclopedia of worthless information about real estate in Hawaii.
Wow.
But I got a good sense of the market, and I've been in it my whole life. That's all I do.
So you're, if you'll excuse the expression, you're kind of like Hawaii's Warren Buffett of real estate, almost. Starting at age 15.
Yeah. In terms of Hawaii, I pretty much people recognize me as an expert on real estate in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
I'm considered, innovative, creative. That's how people describe me. I'm just committed to real estate. It makes sense to me. I see it as if you don't own real estate, you're going to have a tough time living in the state. You got to own the house you're renting or living in. You cannot afford to be a renter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for a lot of people, especially the younger generation, the American dream and the prospect of owning a house in a place like Hawaii is something that seems increasingly out of reach, especially with inflation. I know that you probably saw a number of news outlets reported that you needed to make at least $53 an hour as a single individual in Hawaii, just to live comfortably. And that's basically impossible. There's no way that somebody, graduating from the University of Hawaii with a bachelor's degree right out of the gates is going to, be able to make $53 an hour. And
what you're saying, Danny, is true. But it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where the Singapore example comes in. I don't know if you followed the Singapore example, but when they came to Hawaii in the 60s, they came to Hawaii because we were the most successful state or city to create affordable housing for our people in the early 60s. It was phenomenal what we were doing. And so they came here to see, hey guys, how are you doing it? What are you doing? Because we want to do it in Singapore. And we outlined the things that had happened in Hawaii that allowed us to have this blossoming of affordable units in the 60s, early 60s. And remember, we were building probably 10,000 units a year in the mid-60s. And that's when our residential population or our house number of homes were something like 100,000. Okay, today that same rate of building would be 40 to 50,000 houses a year, just to put it into perspective. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what happened in the 60s? Of course, the guys came back from the war. They wanted to go FHA, VA, and the federal government would not accept Hawaii for FHA, VA loans because we were leasehold, and our leases were not financeable. So the federal government, you said you had to change our leases to a modern lease. And so they came up with a new lease. Everybody adopted the new lease except Hawaiian Homes. And I mention Hawaiian Homes because that's the reason they're failing. They use this archaic lease that does not create value, is not financeable. And so, of course, they're going to fail whenever they try to do anything leasehold. But anyway, going back to the rest of us, if you look at the 50s, late or early 60s, there was almost no leasehold single-family homes. None, because you couldn't finance them. All of our leasehold was usually ag, and you had maybe leasehold along Kahala Beach because the wealthy could get it financed because you didn't pledge the real estate, you pledged your personal guarantees and stuff. But very little leasehold residential. By the mid to end of the 60s, leasehold was king. And that's because the modern lease allowed it. The other thing that happened in the 60s is we accepted a condominium statute or law. We were the first state in the union to do condominiums. So that now allowed small landowners to also lease their land and build high-rise. Made a huge difference. So between the reform of the leasehold and the condominium statute, we have everything in place to build. And the other thing was the concrete. I didn't realize it, but concrete was a new type of construction for high-rise buildings and piles, which were important to Singapore because they're on the ocean like us. But the key is they went back, did what Hawaii did, and they built one of the strongest, most vibrant economies. They created jobs for their people, high-paying jobs, a high-tech society. They did everything Hawaii wanted to do, and we failed because we lost our way. So Singapore ended up with the housing, 95% owner-occupied, some of the best housing in the world. Singapore ended up with a very strong local economy. They went into banking and finance and technology. People in Singapore, kids that grew up in Singapore can get a job in Singapore. And because they are so well educated, they can pretty much get a job anywhere in the world. All because they got into owning real estate early on in their nations. I think they were established like around 64, 65. Mm-hmm. And their premier understood the importance of real estate. And he went to school with an architect or an engineer here in Hawaii. And that's one of the reasons I think they came to Hawaii, because I remember the meeting was in an office and the guy was explaining the premier was a roommate of his in college or something. Now, I was all of, 11, 12 years old. So, at the time, if I'd known it was going to be a big issue when I'm 75, I would have taken notes. I'm doing it by memory pretty much. But, I remember that my mom was there. I know this engineer was there. There were attorneys. And my recollection is most of the people that were there were Chinese. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming the premier was Chinese. I don't know. I don't even remember who it was. But I think he was also an architect or an engineer. But he understood the importance of real estate. Now, he was a benevolent dictator, so it was a little easier for him to maybe change all the rules and get the housing built. But what he did is what Hawaii should have done, what we started doing, and we lost our way.
So, basically right now, if, obviously things have become, entrenched in ways that are very difficult to untangle. But, if we were to try and I guess, rectify the situation at the Honolulu City Council and the Hawaii State Legislature, what do you think would be some of the first steps that we could take to straighten things out for Hawaii and kind of put us on the right path towards not only affordable housing, but value generation, so that people are basically in control of their destiny and not always chasing after the latest local gimmick, basically.
Yeah, there's no easy answer to that question. It's more I'll answer it, because to me, one, it is a solvable crisis. It would probably take 10 to 15 years for us to solve it. It is relatively easy to solve. The first thing is you have to understand the problem, right? All of the studies realize our market has distorted. It started distorting in the early 60s, so it's been distorting for about 64, 65 years, okay? So all of these reports you get from the university, from grassroots, all they're doing is studying our market, distorted after 60 years of failure, and trying to predict what we should do to create affordable housing. Mm-hmm. Well, all the reports you get are not accurate. First off, we have to understand the market. We have to understand what the problem is. Our city, our state government does not really understand real estate, does not understand how value is created, or they wouldn't have made all these crazy decisions they've made. And they're not just decisions with real estates. It's this idea of commitment. It's decisions in almost everything they've done. They've done it to the detriment of the people of Hawaii, because they don't understand value, how they create value and how they give value away. So understanding the market is important. Having the commitment to solve the problem. We talk a good story, but I can tell you right now, our government, our legislature, our city council does not have the commitment. They're afraid of the risk. They don't understand. They constantly make the wrong decision. Right now, I think everyone in Hawaii believes we have a supply problem. We need to build more houses. The reality is, the more houses we build, the worse the problem will be. Building homes is not the solution. That's the problem. We're building homes, but we're building them at a value that is affordable to outside buyers. Our problem is not supply. Our problem is demand. We need to control the demand from outside buyers. To me, the first step in doing that is figuring out what is a value for a Hawaii resident. And if you take a real estate market anywhere in the world, real estate markets as a rule are local in nature. So the first thing you want to do is figure out, well, what would Hawaii's market be if there was no outside influence, if there was no distortion? Mm-hmm. And that's relatively simple, because in any community, you would sell houses based on the wages paid in that community. Common sense, right? Mm-hmm. If there's not an outside buyer, the buyer has to come from within the community, and your pricing would have to be tied to wages. So if you take the wages and determine what they can afford to pay, and Maui did this study, and they determined that the local market, I think, was something like $400,000 for the average home. So the average home is $400,000. Yet the mainland buyers are paying $1.2 million, and the Asian buyers are paying $1.3 million. So right off the bat, the distortion in our market, just because of the demand, is $700,000 to $800,000. So we want to blame the building department, the rules and the regulations, which are part of the cost, but it's not $700,000 or $800,000. Okay, it's a small part of the cost, and it's a delay. But some of those protections are needed, and our attitude is we'll get rid of all the protections because we need to reduce the price. It's not going to reduce the price, right? It's just going to mean they make more money. They're not going to. We have to get the local market in that 400,000 average range to be affordable for our people.
No, and
right?
I completely concur and agree with this, and being somewhat of you know, this is a topic that I studied before, when I was in college, and obviously, the issue is that you have too many dollars, which are basically chasing the housing here in Hawaii, and that obviously is inflationary. The Austrian economist, Murray Rothbard, basically had this classic example, where he talked about, if you have an island and you've got like four guys on this, desert island, and they basically create an economy where, they use, bottle caps that they found from washed up, bottles on the beach as like a form of economy. If there's a fixed number of bottle caps on that island, the prices basically remain stable. There's no way you could have inflation unless, of course, more bottle caps, made it in there. And, that's basically the situation with Hawaii. You can have too many foreign dollars chasing the domestic supply. But maybe you could help us understand this. I know that you have a very unique perspective on how to structure this regulation, but at first blush, I think a lot of people would basically say this makes a lot of sense, but how would we do it without running into the brick wall basically of the dormant commerce clause of the United States Constitution, which basically
all of the things I'm suggesting, the state of Hawaii has been doing for 30 years. Almost every state in the United States does it on their affordable housing. Mm-hmm. So that's just not true. The restrictions we're talking about are allowed. But I also disagree with your economic example in the sense that Hawaii, what you said in the beginning part basically was that there's too many buyers chasing a limited supply. I have news for you. We're an international market. We could build 1 million homes and we would be able to sell them because people are buying because of our location, our quality of living. So we have to be careful. Supply is not a solution. Supply will simply attract more people. And if we get the $1 million house down to 700,000, we just attract even more people because retirees can afford that. People without as much money could. So as prices go down, we just attract more and more outside buyers. So the model has to be one where we build, but we have to build into an affordable market that has restrictions. So let's talk about the commerce clause and the restrictions of what can be done. Because everyone's going to tell you it's unconstitutional. All right? But I want you to think about COVID. You can't go to church, unconstitutional. You can't go to school, unconstitutional. You have to wear masks, unconstitutional. You can't go to a large store. You have to shut your business. You can't go to Hawaii to travel. All of those things would technically be unconstitutional, but they were constitutional because there was a crisis. We have a housing crisis. So if our governor and our mayors declare a housing crisis, they can enforce additional rules that normally would not apply. But I want you to understand, all the rules I'm talking about, we've been using in our affordable housing for years. And they're not unconstitutional. The difference is I'm talking about a market where once a unit goes in, it will always be affordable and it will always be sold tied to wages. Right now, our affordable market is we have a 3-year restriction on resale. We have a 5-year, a 10-year, a 30-year restriction. Not going to work. We need a lifetime restriction on resale. So for the life of that property, once it's in this program, will always remain in the program. So who can it be sold to? Well, it can be sold to anyone. The requirement is you got to be a U.S. citizen. You got to be 18 years old. You have a limit on how many assets you can have, so you can't be a millionaire. You can't have $500,000 in cash. The assets would be something like you can have $100,000. Realize most people in Hawaii don't have $100,000 in cash to buy a house or $100,000 in assets. I mean, they don't even have that. But so you have those kinds of restrictions, which are the identical restrictions we have on affordable housing today. So we're not changing anything. other than we are going to say we're going to apply those restrictions to a new market where the houses are going to be built at a price affordable for our people. And when they want to resell, they have to resell tied to wages. If wages double, the price doubles. What we've done is we've created a local market within a community that's an international market. Because every house in this program has restrictions on resale, etc. Now realize for the average buyer, they're going to sit there, oh, but I want the appreciation. But why would a local buyer want the appreciation? He's buying to live in it, and he's going to sell it and buy another unit in this market that's restricted. Then at some point he'll sell it and buy a smaller unit because he's retiring. Or if he keeps his house, who's he going to sell it to? His kids, because they're going to want to stay here. So this concept of appreciation is part of the problem. You do not buy real estate for appreciation. Appreciation is not the greatest creator of wealth in real estate. The greatest creator of wealth is locking in a constant monthly payment.
Right. Predictability.
But you lock in the payment, your pay goes up, but your cost of owning or cost of buying that home don't. Your water, electricity, and stuff goes up, but the biggest part, the monthly payment is constant. And the example I use, and I go back in time, because if I go forward, the numbers get so big, no one's going to believe you. Mm-hmm. But in the 60s, the house sold for, let's say, $25,000. Back then, it was expensive. The government was actually investigating why is housing so expensive? Are the developers taking advantage of us? And that's a house that's $25,000. Okay, and today that house is probably $1 million. Well, the person who bought it only spent about $25,000, $26,000, $29,000 in interest to buy that. The person who rented it up until today spent probably $1 million, $1.5 million in rent. So the difference between owning and renting is a huge number. Right. Now realize in the 60s, the rent was $225, $275, $280. Rents were really low. Today, your rents would start at $4,000 and go up. You do the math, making $254,000 and multiply it out, and your million becomes 20 million or something like that. Sure. It's huge. Okay, so the economy, inflation has shown that appreciation is nice, but it's not the greatest wealth creator, because that family who bought the house probably paid their payment off in 30 years if they just followed the amortization, mm-hmm. or they paid it off in 10 or 15 years by making additional principal payments. They now had all the additional money they could save. They could put it in their style of living. They might have invested in stocks and bonds or real estate. They might have started a business. They might have paid for a college education. The key is they had the money and could decide what to do. And I know quite a few buyers who purchased from my mom, single women, right? And today they're worth $10, $20 million because they bought a $20,000 house 40 years ago or something. Right. My aunt lived in a project in New York, single woman living in one of the most expensive cities, traveled to Europe every year for a vacation. And she bought into a tenant-owned building. So when she moved in, her security deposit of $400 was her down payment. Her mortgage payment, or her share of the mortgage payment, was locked in. When she left 40, 50 years later, she got like $3,000, $4,000 back, which was her $400 plus the interest on the money. Okay, so that's all she got. But she had been able to save $2 million in her bank account. So she had the money to retire and live a good life because she didn't have rent going up all the time, because she was basically an owner in a tenant-owned building. Okay, I mean, they're not really owners; they're just tenants, but they control their destiny. Okay, so over and over again, we see it happening. The problem is we need to establish this independent market. It's probably got to be under Hawaii Housing or something, and they sort of act as the trustee to make sure all the rules are enforced, etc. And you know our target is we got to build a home at 450, right? And I'm going to give you one more example because I think it speaks to where we are today. You know, they're talking about building small homes on small lots.
I saw that. Yeah, Grassroot was advocating for that.
Worst thing we can do.
Right.
But what I think is hilarious is they had the article at the front page of the paper, and they're talking about it. They had a picture of a very attractive small home built by a developer in the, I think, Kunia area of Oahu. Mm-hmm. And if you read the description, the house cost $975,000.
Right. Yeah, for a
so
shack.
Small
basically.
Houses are not affordable. And this is where the mistake is. They want you to add the additional zoning to our single-family homes. In effect, converting every single-family district to an apartment or multifamily zoning. As soon as you do that, you increase the value of the land by probably $200,000. How do you make housing more affordable? By doing that. Right. Now, if we did the same thing and we said you got to sell the lot at $100,000 to a buyer, and then we have to be able to build a house that will qualify or come in under the medium income or the average income for local residents. Now you've put a price limit on that property. So one, the value won't go up. And if you sell the house, and especially for people who own land now, they'll do it. They'll condominiumize it. They'll sell it to their son or their daughter, their niece or their nephew. So it's local guys helping local guys. They're still going to make money because they get $100,000 for the lot, and they're not giving it away, right? The house can be built, so you'll end up building houses for $400,000. That works. What they're proposing is just blanket zoning, which increases value, allows people to sell. I don't know if my speech, if I mentioned Palm Springs. Did I mention Palm Springs? I don't think so. Did you see?
I can't recall, but you know, in listening to this, it looks like there's a couple of headwinds that we're basically facing here in Hawaii. You know, one is the fact that, and this is basically out of our control on this end, you know, the Federal Reserve policy basically has encouraged people to seek, alternate means of storing their value simply because, you know, people waste their money if they save it, essentially. So it encourages people to basically flip everything from Rolex watches to, houses, basically, because it's a bubble economy. But the other issue is that, you know, a lot of people have this expectation that the house is a store of wealth. And so, you know, I remember when I was coming out of college, like, you know, everybody basically wanted to purchase a house, not to live in it, but because they intend to just, you know, basically flip it and then buy an even bigger house, right? And that, you know, that basically distorted the economy, right? So, you know,
but again, in this program, that wouldn't be allowed. You're buying as an owner-occupant, and you have to be an owner-occupant.
Right. But I guess, to get into this, so, you know, if we were to implement this policy, would the first step be getting an emergency proclamation or getting the legislature to basically, vote on some type of resolution that basically says that a housing emergency exists to empower this type of special regulation? Because it seems like if like the governor would do this, it would be, you know, using the analogy of like COVID. It would have to be something that would be subject to reauthorization, at a certain interval. I don't know if that's like every 6 months or, you know, a year or something like that. I'd have to look at the statute. But for this to be sustainable, it seems like we would have to repetitively declare a state of emergency, wouldn't we?
I want you to remember now, we're talking about declaring an emergency and showing how you could go about doing it. But everything I'm talking about is already being done by the state of Hawaii in their affordable housing program. I'm just extending it to a lifetime. I'm putting in the requirement that when you resell, you do not resell at appreciation. You resell at the increase in wages. So we're creating a local market. And I don't think to me, that's just a lifetime restriction on resale. And the argument is it keeps housing affordable. Right now, they have 30-year restrictions. Someone told me they were looking at 50 and 60-year restrictions. And I sit here and say, why? Why not a lifetime restriction? We create an affordable market that will be separate from our present market. The mainland guys, the investors can still buy in the other market. They can drive prices up. We don't care because we have, we hope, a couple 100,000 homes over 10 years that are in this other market that has restrictions. And it's no different than the 20,000 affordable units we presently have, let's say, which have restrictions. We're just codifying the restrictions. We're making it uniform. We're creating a uniform market. So it's to me, declaring an emergency is fine, but I'm not even sure we need that, although you probably should do it. So if you have to restrict something for a year or two, or, you have a justification under the emergency or crisis provisions.
Are there any bills that are currently alive at the legislature that you think are going to help the current crisis, or are we basically...
They're all wrong. None of them. The legislature, the lobbyists, the landowners, the contractors, the developers, they don't like this. Okay? That's one of the reasons I said, guys, we'll leave your market alone.
Because it threatens the ability to profit, right?
And we're going to develop another market where the government puts all of its efforts into creating affordable housing. Now, you got to talk about rentals, too, because, rentals, again, we're building all of these rental projects, but we're giving the value away.
Right.
It's not going to help the local guys. We warehouse our people, and we use Section 8 and all of these other programs where we subsidize the rent, and we use our poor as a funnel through which the wealth and benefits flow to the wealthy mainland owner.
Right.
We need to structure it so the wealth and benefits go to our people. And in my speech, I think I used the example of, mass transit, photovoltaic, REITs, all of the different things we've done, some of them not even tied to real estate. But just to show you how, in like a 10-year period, our legislature, our council made 5 or 6 decisions, and they raised our cost of housing, and they raised our cost of living by $500 to $4,000 a month.
Right.
Okay? Now, I want you to think about that. That's just over the last 5 or 10 years. If we go back 60 years and correct every poor decision we made, I suspect, we'd be in a much better place than we are right now, because it's not just the cost of housing, it's our cost of living has distorted. And when real estate distorts, your whole economy distorts, because people rent space for warehousing. They rent their offices, and all of it's tied to value. So as our land values go up, our warehouse rents go up. A warehouse on the mainland might be 50 cents a square foot. Here in Hawaii, to build a new warehouse, you got to get a rent of something like $2.50. That tells you how much the market has distorted. Okay? So, and they can tell you, well, Hawaii's more expensive. Well, yeah, we have a shipping cost gets added, but we're also more expensive because we've mismanaged our real estate asset. Palm Springs, for bad Airbnb about 6 months ago, their housing costs went down by 25%, I think. Just by banning Airbnb. So many people had gone into Palm Springs because it's a resort area, and were buying homes, spending $1.5 million, $2 million, because they could rent it out for $15,000 a month or something. Right? Same thing's happening here in Hawaii. We got 35,000 units in short-term rentals. Look at the Lahaina fire. 5,000 homes destroyed. 590 owner-occupied. The rest were investors. At least that's what I assume from what the article said, because they said the owner occupants were only 590, I think.
Sure.
So again, the question is, well, wait a second. What's going on here? That's a residential district. Why weren't they owner occupied? Because they're Airbnb, investors bought them. They drove the price up. Mm-hmm. So if we banned Airbnb and vacation rentals and our market went down by 25%, that's good. Airbnb don't like it. Mm-hmm. The investors who have them don't like it. But for our people, it's a good thing. But the house is still not affordable because we still have the retirees who come to Hawaii and they want to retire because, one, we have a great military structure here, so all the retired military will come because they have the golf course, they have the clubs, they have the PXs and everything else, right? And then you get the retirees who just want to come to Hawaii because it's a beautiful place to live. So, you've got Airbnb, the investors driving up our market. You've got mainland retirees driving up our market. Also realize we are a small market, extremely small market. So 400 or 500 people can distort it. Our problem is we have thousands of people coming from the mainland. And when our government tells us the population dropped by 12,000, and what they didn't tell us is 50,000 people left and 38,000 moved in, and the population went down by 12. So wait a second, 50,000 left? And if that happens for 4, 5, or 6 years, it's a huge shift in who's buying real estate. And I think those are the kinds of facts when you start to lay them out, you say, oh, wait a second now. It's not a question of building. We got to manage our assets a little better, and we got to make sure the local guys can compete. Now, the other solution is raise our wages to $50 an hour so we can afford to buy.
But we wouldn't be able to sustain that, yeah. Well, it sounds like, basically this is something that's going to require an immense amount of political conviction and political willpower, basically to do because, as you mentioned, you have a lot of economic interests who basically need this market distortion and this market instability, to maintain their livelihood. And so, basically,
let's leave them alone. Let's give it to them. I don't want to destroy their distortion. Mm-hmm. I want to create another distortion that benefits the people.
So to get to that point, though, because right now it looks like, basically, our legislators and our city council members are basically gun shy about doing that. So
they don't understand, Danny. They do not understand. It's the kind of thing when I gave, the speech I sent you, mm-hmm. I think I sent you the one I gave to the union. Mm-hmm. And when I had given one earlier to the realtors, the International Federation of Realtors dealing with foreign clients or something. I forgot what their name was. Mm-hmm. And I expected to get a lot of heat because I'm basically blaming them and their clients for part of the problem. But it was interesting because I actually got a couple standing ovations where they sit there and it was like, yeah, we agree. And afterwards, people said, Peter, I never thought of the problem the way you're describing it. Oh, my God, you're so right. It makes sense. And that's the problem. People do not understand where we are and what the problem is, right? I'm thinking I should run for governor just so I can debate the other candidates on housing and try to educate the public. But the problem is the press does not report on this particular topic because it's kind of complex and it's not a one article. This is like you got to do a series of articles explaining step by step what changes can be made, interviewing 17,000 people or whatever. But
it's difficult because, number one, the legislative session that we have is extremely short. So in the time that we have, the couple of months that the legislature is in session, you really don't have time to, argue these issues. And so what happens is the agenda setting is something that needs to happen in like the off session. So like, persuading legislators, basically takes a lot of advanced legwork. And then even then, because of the fact that this is such, as you say, a poorly understood issue, it's subject to a lot of, misinformation and, panic and fear mongering. And, basically you have the situation where the status quo, mediocrity basically reigns because the people in power don't want to touch it. And, the people who are, voting on this or that have a stake in this don't have time to learn about it. And so it's sort of like a deadlock. And I guess, maybe you would have to, get involved in politics to force the issue. Because, like if I were to, talk to a committee chair and ask them, to support this idea, they'd probably not understand it. They probably would say, oh, we'll get back to you. And if we were to talk to, the homelessness coordinator of Governor Green's office or, Green himself,
they don't understand it.
Yeah. So I guess this is something that only has a political solution then, at least at this point. And by political, what we really mean is an electoral solution where, you'd have to have, yourself and I guess a bunch of other people willing to run for city council and state legislature seats that would basically be willing to advance this agenda. Otherwise, it's basically, as they say, academic, right? It's dead on arrival because it's such a
I suspect if the people of Honolulu understand this concept or they understand what's happening, they will demand their legislature and their council take action and do things. They consider it. And I know I'm doing my farm projects out on the Wailua side. And, we got around to talking about affordable, and I was explaining this concept to the people. Very well received. And they got it. And I even talked about, restricting the value of your properties if you want, and this is why. And they were amazingly, I really thought people would resist it, but they actually were like, yeah, we do that. Now, some people are like, no, I want the money, Majority of them said, no, to help the local guys, we do that. And you're right, Peter, we're going to sell it to our kids and our grandkids anyway. So it's just an illusion. And if we can do this and keep it affordable, we will. The public is getting it. The problem is, I talked to a group of 200 or 300 people. Yeah, they got it. They don't maybe understand it completely, but they see there is a hope or there's a chance. The problem is you try to get reporters to write on this topic. None of them want to write because I think it's somewhat difficult to explain. But the city or the state has to be challenged because all of their programs are based on the misinformation that's being provided based on our distorted real estate economy by grassroots and the University of Hawaii. And it's interesting because these reports come out and I call them and say, guys, your report is wrong. And there's the one report Grassroots had where the professor says he proved that the outside buyer has no influence on pricing in Hawaii.
Right, I saw that. I think they said it was like 30-something% of like the sales were for local buyers, but obviously it's not the percentage, but it's like the outside money that is the distorting influence.
Well, the reality is, one, somebody gets off the airplane and say they want to live here, they become a resident. So for our government, they say Kaka'ako was bought by local residents. I got news for you. You're lucky if 10% was bought by true locals. The rest were bought by retirees from Japan, working remotely from the United States, retirees from the United States.
That was the problem during COVID,
Absolute distortion. None of our reporters picked up on it. None of the news channels picked up on it. Everybody just looks the other way and lets the misinformation survive. And so people believe, wow, it's me. I'm not working hard enough. I don't have a good enough job.
Right.
No, it's not the people. The government has failed us. They failed us. And to me, the news media has failed us because they're supposed to be the ones, I think, trying to educate people or presenting the alternate view. And that's not happening. So It's fine to say the government's wrong, but I think we're all to blame to some degree for allowing this to happen. And I know on some of the concepts I met with Governor Waihee, and especially on the Hawaiian Homes stuff, and he sat there with just going, oh my God, Peter, I wish I'd spoken to you when I was, oh my God, Peter, this would have worked. Oh, we should have done this. Oh my God, how come we didn't see it? Mm-hmm. That's the kind of response you get from people. But then, how do you get, it's so entrenched right now that even developers, even when you tell them you're going to leave the present market alone, they're nervous because how are they going to justify the $1 million price when they can actually build that same comparable unit for a much lower price?
No, and that's part of the reason why. That's part of the reason why the infrastructure here is so bad, because it's all about basically selling the cheapest, poorly assembled product for the maximum price. I mean, I live in like Royal Kunia, and the streets here are terrible. The excuse, oh, we didn't have enough space, or oh, we didn't have enough land. There's clearly enough space. They just wanted to sell houses that are, pack spam in a can, basically, right? And so I can see how, making houses more affordable, and at the same time, moderating essentially the tulip mania over houses here would spill over to a lot more constructive things, like, for example, safer streets, better urban design. But you're right.
You got to understand, housing also is the reason we have a lot of suicides, drug addiction, divorces, spouse abuse. Because we're expecting people to have 3 and 4 jobs and still raise a family, mm-hmm. and then live paycheck to paycheck because they don't earn enough money to pay rent, because rents are distorted.
Right.
Rents alone are distorted by Section 8, which pays above market rates because they find it so hard to find rental units. So they're not helping, they're making it worse. And then you have the military that has their housing allowance that allows them to rent units at above market prices. So, everything that's happening is distorting the market to the detriment of the local guy. Mm-hmm. And our government allows it because they don't understand it. And for years I've been talking to them about it. And, they kind of see it's not working right. But the trouble is they'll go talk to some other developer or some other lobbyist or some other property owner. And he's like, hey, don't rock the boat. I mean, that's what they always tell me, Peter.
Right.
We like what you're doing. You're doing affordable housing. Go ahead and do it, but don't rock the boat. Mm-hmm. We're making money, and don't rock the boat. The reality is they should make money. I have no problem with an affordable housing developer making money, mm-hmm. but he shouldn't be making buku bucks on an affordable project, right? And so, anyway, if you listen to the speech, I kind of outlined a lot. I mean, and again, the speech is at like the 30,000 foot level. Mm-hmm. It doesn't go into all the little details because that would tend to overwhelm people. But if people can just understand there is a distortion, we cannot look to the distortion for the solution. We have to look at our market with no distortion to figure out where we should be.
Right.
Once we know where we should be, then the question becomes, how do we go from 1 million down to 400,000? What do we have to do?
Yeah, well, I mean,
find the solutions.
It's tough. I mean, I worked at the legislature, for almost a decade, and to do something like this would require a lot of moving parts, and most of the people there have a very short attention span, and they just can't be bothered to do this. I mean, because part of this too, we would have to essentially create some kind of agency and hire a lot of people to help manage this. And
we have an agency, Hawaiian Housing.
Yeah, but I mean, like, for something like this, it seems like you would need to greatly beef up the agency, right? You would basically need...
No, you would. Well, yes and no, because the properties would not... The properties would probably be, depending on how you structure it, the land could be leasehold, kind of like Hawaiian Homes, where it's owned by a government agency. And you, the local resident, get to rent it for $1 or whatever, and then you build a house or however you want to work it. the properties will be managed by condominium association management companies as a rule, not by the state or the city, because they're horrible managers. The boards of directors will kind of control what's happening, right? So you end up with a trust like a Bishop estate that would hold the land to 200,000 acres on which 1 million homes are built. But they don't get involved in the day-to-day house or that kind of thing. They just hold the land and make sure when it's sold, all of the restrictions are met in terms of pricing. And again, that's just a mathematical formula, so it shouldn't be that difficult. But yeah, you'd have to beef up the agencies, but I don't think it's as more of the growth, I think, would be on the private sector side, where you'd have more and more property management firms. You know, the tenants would become, have like a board of directors, and they'd operate their rental building to a certain degree with guidance, those kinds of things. Danny, you can talk about how the legislature doesn't want to do it. It's too complex. But what? So we're going to sit here and suffer and destroy our state or our people because they don't get it, or it's too complex, or, they got short attention spans? I mean, this, we have every excuse for doing what we're doing. And the reality is we need to do something. And it's not like we got a lot of time. If we don't do it in the next or start something in the next 4 to 5 years, we're going to lose control of our state. Local guys won't live here anymore. They're going to be living in Vegas.
Right.
And you're going to have all these mainland retirees. The Native Hawaiian population is going to suffer unless Hawaiian Homes reforms. And then we'll take it from there.
Well, it's hard. I mean, unfortunately, the city councils and the state legislature are not well adapted to change. The best example of that is like the Hawaii 5-cent bottle fee. That took them almost nearly 20 years just to pass that. So when it comes to government responding quickly or even doing things quickly, it's very tough. It's very rare. I mean, one of the rarest examples is probably you're looking at the cannabis bill right now, which is, moving at Mach speed through the legislature. And, they basically are pushing that through no matter what anyone says. But, even that has kind of evolved over, the last 20 years. And so I get it that we need to take action. But, we have a state which is basically rigged and designed in such a way that you can't take quick action because there's just too much, there's just too many handbrakes, involved. Have you considered, or have you already possibly talked offline with the president of the Senate or the Speaker of the House about legislation for this, in the off season, trying to maybe lower their resistance to this type of thing? Or
I really haven't talked to. I've talked to individual legislators and stuff. I haven't talked to the powers to be.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it is because I know they go and then start talking to the lobbyists and to the developers and the property owners, and they have a vested interest in preserving what's there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that you're going to find our legislature, cares enough about the people to make the change, because the people's voice is somewhat muted by what the large developers, contractors, and property owners can focus on the legislature in terms of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's a possibility. I'm 75 years old. I don't have a lot of time left. You young kids can take the mantle and run with it. I'm getting a lot of interest, a lot of support from the younger voters or younger people in the population. And we are seeing more and more young developers
mm-hmm.
starting to adopt some of what I'm talking about. They see it. People are beginning to understand it. But, I'm talking to a small group of thousands when you need to reach 1 million.
Mm-hmm.
So I have no illusion. I'm not going to be able to do it by myself. and I can assist. I can talk to reporters. I can go on TV. I can give speeches, but it's still, to me, very much an uphill battle unless you can get articles or reporters. I know one attorney who was retired heard my speech and called and said, "Peter, you're right on. Mm-hmm. My God, that's the problem, and you have the solution. We need to get something published." So he's trying to do a Randy Roth type, disclosure, like what they did with Bishop Estate.
Right.
About doing an article. So I sent him a whole bunch of information, and he's trying to write it up. But this guy's 90 years old.
Right.
Is he going to live long enough to get it done? I don't know. But I found it interesting that he was a real estate attorney, and it made perfect sense to him. He said, "Peter, you hit it right on the head. I can't believe people don't see it." Even he admitted he didn't see it until he kind of knew it. But and you got to realize, too, he was here in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. So he kind of knows the history of what happened. And, he says, "Peter, you're right on. You hit it. This is exactly what we did wrong."
No, I appreciate you sharing this with me, and I definitely agree with you. And in fact, this is heartbreaking because it's a lot to do, and it's basically for policymakers, this is basically like trying to digest an elephant, and we how do you eat an elephant bite by bite? But unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to eat this thing.
We don't have time.
I think this is basically something with essentially an electoral solution, because there's no way that you can take the current group and do that, because they're just too slow to respond. And so I guess the takeaway from this is the younger people, particularly the Generation Zs and the younger end of the millennials, are basically going to need to form some kind of alliance where they start putting people in office who are pencil-focused, laser-focused, on housing reform. Because right now, this is just basically platitudes, essentially, right? I mean, that's what you get from the council. That's what you get from the legislature and the governor's office. Yeah. So, well, Peter, I appreciate your time, and you've definitely given us a lot to think about, and I think we'll have to continue to talk about this and continue to bring attention to this. But thank you for giving us your busy morning and sharing this with me. I really appreciate it.
I want to thank you for caring enough to even think about it or question it or challenge it and listen. That's really what has to happen. We just need to get more people to listen and open their minds and start to consider there is a solution.
Right.
We can solve the problem. And then the question becomes how.
Uh-huh.
Right now, nobody believes it can be solved. For very few people.
Well, I definitely believe it can be solved. It's just that I have very little faith in the people who benefit from the status quo, and that was part of the reason why I wrote the previous article about, why it's miserable to be stuck in the middle, because, my experience, working at the legislature, I get to see both sides where, they go out in public and they say one thing, and then, you go back to the office and it's basically about deal making. It's basically about, fear mongering. And, I like the fact that you have a can-do attitude about this. And that's great. And that's probably because, you're an entrepreneur and you're a free market thinker, which is all about, being able to be resourceful and being flexible. Whereas, if you're a legislator or if you're in the executive branch, it's basically about control, right? And so mediocrity has the tendency to reign in a situation like that because, people don't want to, jeopardize the safety of their seat. And and that's terrible because, I think to myself, it's like, okay, the majority of you guys are, you're just part-time legislators. You make, less than 70K, and you're basically, sitting on policy that could, save Hawaii. So, for 70K, you're going to spend every single day, pretending to care in a committee hearing. Occasionally, you go out and you give a speech or you hand out a certificate, and that's basically your life. I mean, what a miserable human being it must be to be a Hawaii city council member or a Hawaii legislator, right? I mean, that's no way to live. If I were in office, I would want to make a difference. And I appreciate the fact that, you're a very proactive person about this. And, I honestly don't know how we could change people's minds in office aside from replacing the people in office. But
I'm going for changing the view of the voters.
Yeah.
To let them realize there is a solution and to start demanding that solution.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the Hawaiian homes, we're finding that happening now.
Mm-hmm.
Where more and more Native Hawaiians are challenging them on the use of the present lease.
Right.
And why don't they modernize it? And it's taken maybe 5 years to get to the point now where even some of the very prominent Native Hawaiian leaders are beginning to say, yes, that's what's wrong. That's what we need to change. And, again, it was just bringing it to the surface so they can then go talk to their attorneys or accountants or whoever it is. And they can sit there and go, well, yeah, it does make sense. Or, I looked at it, it is an alternative, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Nobody's thinking about it because everyone's convinced we can't do anything about it. It's a supply problem, But the reality is we're distracted by the reality of where we are and why we're here,
Absolutely. Well, Peter, you have a great morning, and we will keep in touch. But thank you for sharing this with me. I'm definitely going to talk with you more about this because, this is a very intriguing idea. And, I would definitely like to, educate people more about this because it's something that really is, the future of Hawaii. But
I'm hoping I keep you all night thinking about this. Going, gee, what can we do? How do we do
it? I think you've already succeeded in that. All right, Peter, have a great morning. We appreciate you.
Oh, thank you.
Take care.
Appreciate it.